Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this chilly night. My name is Laura Braasch, and I am going to share my screen. So, yeah, my name's Laura. I have been working with the Dartmouth Organic Farm for the last 10 years. And it's a really special place. And I hope that many of you, if you haven't had the chance to visit, will feel free to stop by sometime. But I'll tell you a little bit about what we are trying to do there and why I think it's such a special place with a lot of opportunities for learning and for community building and for research and teaching. Yes, so the organic farm is Dartmouth's educational farm, and we are run through the Dartmouth Sustainability Office. So we're not, associated with an academic department necessarily. And that allows us a really great opportunity to collaborate across many different disciplines to use the farm in creative ways. And I just wanted to mention also the Sustainability Office is a part of Dartmouth's Climate Collaborative Initiative, which was launched in 2024 and announced kind of Dartmouth's big commitment to investing in decarbonization of our campus, and then lots of other climate-related teaching research initiatives that are meant to kind of bring students into the effort to use our campus as a living lab, to study climate and generate research on climate science. And it's really meant to be interdisciplinary. It's a really exciting thing, but the Sustainability Office is kind of part of that initiative, and the Organic Farm is part of the Sustainability Office. But this place here, we have about 220 acres of land along the Connecticut River and up into the forest, kind of across the road. We're situated on Route 10 towards Lyme, a few miles north of campus. And we have a beautiful growing spot right along the river. It's an amazing place for farming. It's on a historic floodplain that over many, thousands and hundreds of thousands of years has created this rich, fertile soil that is completely devoid of rocks, which is the envy of every farm in New Hampshire, the Granite State, which are all full of rocks. That's why we have our kind of iconic stone walls everywhere, is because farmers had to pull stones out of their pastures for the years and pile them up to make their stone fences. But we don't have that here. We have this amazing spot for farming, and we use it for teaching, for research, for community building, and for experiential learning around sustainable agriculture, sustainable food systems, and again, in a really interdisciplinary way. So we try and focus on as much curricular and extracurricular engagement as we can. And that looks a lot of different ways, but we have opportunities for students, yes, through the curriculum. And we have some faculty members here who are doing research and also teach classes at the farm. And we have classes that come out from all sorts of different disciplines, everything from like a Latin classics class who has been reading Virgil's, essays on beekeeping, and they want to come and learn about beekeeping in the field, to, agroecological sciences who are, putting on field trials in our growing spaces. And so it's really a special opportunity where students can kind of like experience many different disciplines. I would say that a lot of what we do out there has been driven by student interest. And I've seen that really grow over the last 10 years that I've been there, is just that students are coming to Dartmouth with an already like kind of established interest in food and food systems and sustainability. And they really want to like try to get their hands dirty and learn what it means to grow food sustainably. And our goal out here as an educational farm is to create lots of learning opportunities for our students. So we're not a production farm. We definitely don't operate as a production farm. There are many inefficiencies in what we're doing in a lot of ways, but and we operate with a high level of diversity in our growing system. So in any given year, we're growing between 50 and 60 varieties of annual vegetables, maybe up to 100 varieties if you include cover crops and flowers that we're planting here in about a half an acre plot. So it's pretty small and it's a high level of diversity. And of course, that is not very efficient farming system, but it is a really great area for learning about lots of different methods of farming. And so our goal here is to really demonstrate to our students what are some of the common agricultural practices for cultivation, for pest management, disease prevention, just all sorts of production methods that are commonly used in sustainable farming. And then where can we also use our creativity or our situation as a university farm to kind of push the boundaries and test out new methods of growing. And so I think, again, as an institutionally supported farm, and with our goal not being around profit generation, but around educational opportunities, we have the privilege of being able to try things. And if they don't pan out, that's really good information for us. And it's also good information we can share with our fellow farmers in our local community to say, hey, you were thinking of using this kind of like black plastic row cover. Well, we tried it out and we did these side-by-side trials and actually it's not so good. I wouldn't invest in that for your whole, 20-acre plot. So we are able to kind of try things out and then provide information to our farmers in our local community that might benefit from that. So they can decide whether it's worth it for them to maybe try things or invest in things or not invest in things. So here's a little snapshot of our farm. I'll just kind of click through some of our slides here. But so the farm. So here's some of our crops here. And then our beloved pizza oven, which, I chose this photo because it's really emblematic of the type of community that we like to create out at the farm. And one of the reasons why it's so special. People who get involved in the farm come to us through many different pathways. Some first come to the farm through a class or maybe a lab or an independent project. Some maybe decide they want to join the farm club, which is our volunteer group of students who come and help us with the work on the farm and the harvesting. And some will come to a fun event, like a celebration of the season. Like we host one in the spring called Braasch, which is like a spring festival essentially to around our planting season and just to kind of bring people together and celebrate the space. And then also for pizza dinners, which we host many throughout the year, but they're a great way for students who maybe don't know what we're doing out here to learn about the farm. They go down in the field, pick some veggies, throw them on their pizza. They have that full circle moment of connecting where their food is coming from, helping grow the food, and then getting to enjoy that in community together and create some memories together. And that's, I think, really at the heart of what we're trying to do there is seeing food as a connector for people and, bringing people together, but then also as a real connection to the land and creating that care for our land and how we treat it and how we grow our food and what that translates to in terms of climate, watershed health, soil health, and our community health as well. So, let's see. Oh, here's your class, Carl. Yeah. So another element of what we're doing besides the community building and the obvious opportunities that provides is, really using the site for teaching and research. And you'll hear two examples tonight of awesome research projects at the farm. And they're not the only examples, but they're very cool uses of our space. And it's exactly what we would hope for this land resource and this agricultural resource to be used for. Because it's easy to access. It's got a lot of opportunity in terms of varied land use history. And you'll hear about that from these two faculty members. But I guess I'll talk a little bit about the produce that we do grow through the farm program. We grow about a half an acre of vegetables each year. And again, as we're not trying to generate profit here, we do sell a little bit of our produce, but within the Dartmouth system. So through like channels like the Moose Lock Ravine Lodge, which does their hiker dinners and meals throughout the season. But most of what we're growing, we're actually donating through community partners like Willing Hands, who collect and also distribute local produce to our community to help alleviate food insecurity. And so, yeah, that's a really amazing partner for us because they do such a good job of getting food out the door and onto people's tables. And we know that pretty much everything we donate to them, it's like out the door the next day and getting eaten and not getting wasted. So that they're an amazing partner. And we also have a few other programs where our produce goes that are kind of the right scale for us to provide like custom veggie bags for. So one of those programs is the Moms in Recovery program, which is a sort of holistic health and wellness support program for new mothers working through opioid addiction. And so we provide those patients at their weekly appointments. They have like appointments for the moms and the newborns bundled together along with other sort of supports, wellness and health supports. And we provide them with a bag of veggies each week. And it makes their lives a little bit easier and has some fresh produce for them. So that's like the right scale. We do maybe 10 or 15 bags a week for them. And it's different patients each week. So it's not always the same patients, but that was kind of the right scale for us to be able to like meet the needs of the whole cohort. And then we do a few other little programs like that throughout the year. But most of our produce is getting donated. A handful of it is getting used for student cooking and experiences on the site and then on campus as well. And almost none of it gets wasted or has to be composted. So we're pretty proud of that. And we grow a huge diversity of things and delicious tomatoes usually. I think this is another class that we ran. Was this your class, Theresa? I can't remember where this was from.
Looks like it.
Yeah, the agroecology class, students doing their presentation. So we do have a barn and a space for teaching and gathering. But yeah, and a greenhouse that is in very varying states of disrepair. But we make do with what we've got. We have, again, a diversity of growing styles and methods. We're trying to really push the boundaries on sustainable systems here. So we are really reducing our soil disturbance in terms of tillage. We're moving towards a really like minimal disturbance system. We're also trying really hard to generate as much of the soil fertility as we can on site through the use of cover cropping and like incorporating living crops into our soil that replenish nutrients that are taken out from harvest. And so that is, yeah, I think it's still a question mark of whether we can get there without additional external input still, but we're trying it out. We're trying to see how much we can minimize buying things like compost and soil amendments from off-site that have to be brought here, that have to be either mined from other places and then shipped to us. So we're trying to really generate as much soil fertility as we can through living roots, through mycorrhizal fungi, through living pathways. So sometimes it looks a bit of a mess, but I think every weed has its purpose, and we try and use a lot of the moments of messiness as opportunities for teaching. We also have bees, which are fun and delightful. So that's a thing. But yeah, so what else was I going to say? What else haven't I covered, Theresa? Lots of things. I think we'll move on to the research quickly because that is where a lot of our core mission really takes place, is like supporting the core teaching and learning mission of the college, and supporting the research that happens and generating real research on site here. And yeah, so I'm happy to answer lots of questions. I'm sure people have questions, but it's a special place. Come and visit. It's always there for you. I don't have any more pictures, but maybe we'll move on to the research and then we can do kind of a discussion at the end. And yeah. Lots more stuff. I think I closed my, it doesn't matter because my slides are done.
All right, let's see if I can do this too.
Let me know if you need help.
Thanks so much, Tara. Does that look good?
Ooh, you have video.
Yeah, standard PowerPoint. Hi everyone, my name is Theresa Ong. I'm assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Studies in the graduate program in Ecology, Evolution, Environment, and Society. So it's a really long program. We call it EES for short, and we're a super interdisciplinary program studying various aspects of environment. And so for me, my focus is agroecology and food systems. And so I'm really lucky to be here at Dartmouth and be able to work at the Dartmouth Organic Farm. So I wanted to first introduce my lab. So it's not just me. I have a wonderful group of graduate students that work with me and scholars of different career stages. Currently, I have Crystal Bagnashi Chunyang-Su, who goes by Crispy, and Kristen Giovanelli. And it's funny, Crystal, Christy, and Kristen. They're my graduate students right now by pure chance. And then we have a slew of different undergraduates that work with us throughout the year. This past summer, we had Caleb Frank and Astoria Fox, but many different undergraduates work with us throughout the year at the Organic Farm. Currently, I also have a postdoc, Martha Torstensen, who came to us from Minnesota, and we work on agroecology. So what is agroecology? How many of you have heard of this before? Yeah, a few of you. Yeah, that's great to hear because often I don't get anyone in the audience that says they know what agroecology is. And in short, agroecology is a science, it's a practice, and it's a movement towards sustainable food systems. And so we really stress the combination of those three dimensions, and agroecology is seeking to change food systems from the specific combination of those three elements. And then as scientists in an institution like Dartmouth, we ask the question, so what are sustainable food systems and how do we really get there and stay there? So that's the big sort of question we ask in our lab. My background personally, I got my master's and PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology. So I'm coming from that sort of like perspective in research I do. And specifically, I combine mathematical modeling and data to understand resilience in agroecosystems. So what's keeping these systems stable, making them unstable. I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the farm that Laura so nicely introduced. So this is a picture from 1971. And 1971 was a really important year in the history of Dartmouth College. Because that's when they purchased the land from the Fullington family. And the Fullington family, they owned this land with the Fullington farm from 1855 all the way up to that time, 1971. So it's a really interesting intact history where you have a single family that's managing this landscape in agriculture. So for me, that's like super exciting. That's super interesting because we can sort of ask, like, what are the consequences of historical management practices on the ecosystems we see today? So the farm went through several different phases in its history. So pre-colonial contact, there definitely was tons of farming in the region, right? Indigenous people had this practice of farming near the river, as Laura mentioned. It's just a great site for farming for everybody, right? And that's also why people settled along the river post-colonial contact. And so first, when people started to move in, they started to clear patches of forest, like here, and you can see in this picture these big patches of cleared pasture land.
Which way is the river from that picture?
The river is over here.
That's over there. Okay.
Yeah, it was a little actually further out during that time because the road was moved a few times in its history. But what was interesting when this land was first settled, merino sheep was a big big deal, like the sweater that Laura's wearing today. It's actually interesting. I heard about this history. It was an American trader basically smuggled merino sheep into Vermont illegally, obviously, and they set off this sheep craze, which had obvious consequences to the economy of the region. Of course, though, New Hampshire soils aren't really that great, and over time we had sort of degradation of the soils, and people transitioned from sheep to dairy. That happened also here on the Fullington farm. And you had sort of like the slow expansion of these two fields during their history of management. And then after the college purchased the land, they basically stopped farming, right? They stopped farming, but they continued to maintain some pockets of pasture through annual mowing. But the areas you see in red here were left to kind of regrow. And so this is a satellite image. I should have made a better quality version, but you can see basically the forest has just regenerated pretty well across this region.
Is that line Highway 10?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're not on the river side of the opposite.
The forest, yeah, the
Yeah.
forest across the road.
Exactly. So we're super interested in this question, right? So we know that these sites were old fields. They were previous agricultural sites. So we're interested to know if there are any legacies of that historical management on the forests we see today. So my research team set out to look at the species composition of the forests across this region, and this red rectangle is the space that we sampled, and it's 10 hectares, which is equivalent to about 27 acres of land. And what that meant was we basically set out maps to split the region into smaller and smaller squares where we could sample all the trees together. And this was a huge effort that involved a lot of undergraduate researchers, but also undergraduates in our classes got to basically go out, learn a lot about species identification, of course, species like different trees, measure them. And so we got like the spatial location of each individual tree and map them all out in this space. So this is what it looks like, okay? This is 11,551 stems that were carefully measured and tagged and marked by different students. And so we have 33 species of trees in this, trees and shrubs in this plot here. And in this plot, like every different color is a different species, basically.
Kind of clarify. So what qualifies as stem?
Yeah.
You have to have branching or nodes or
STEM qualifies in the sense that it has to come from the ground and has to reach breast height, which is about here.
okay. So would suggest some they would suggest there were some shoots coming off it, along with branching nodes or something.
Yeah, so there's a minimum. So we follow forest protocols that are similar to forest censuses that have been done globally, and they have a minimum size diameter of less than or greater than 1 centimeter in diameter, which is not very large. So anything that's like that large, that kind of grows up and reaches this height, gets tagged as a stem.
So how many of those are not trees?
Some of them are not trees, right? They could just be branches within a single individual, but the majority of them are trees. And we do know that information too, because if they belong to the same stem, that's part as well. Good question. Yeah. So we were interested basically in asking that question. Can we trace like the history of agricultural management? And so we did some statistics on the spatial distribution of the species composition. And this effort was led by my former postdoc at Montana Simple, Nathan, who just got a faculty position at the University of Michigan, Flint. And what he showed here was that there are these distinct clusters, these 3 distinct clusters of different species that show up across the plot. So there's this green cluster, there's this blue cluster, there's this orange cluster. And this here is kind of a distribution of the basal area for different species in the plot. So you can kind of see what corresponds to each cluster. Like the orange cluster here, there's a lot of Sugar canadensis, Eastern hemlock, a lot of Acer saccharum in blue here.
That's
Sugar maple.
Sugar maple, yes. And a lot of, let's see, what was the other color?
White pine.
Orange. Okay, I did orange. Great.
White-
Minus strobus.
white pines.
White pine. Exactly. Perfect.
That's
And that's what, yeah, exactly. So it's interesting. They have these different clusters, and just by eye, do you see anything?
pine trees fill in,
Fine.
the old farm.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of pine in the areas where we remember those like original.
I'm struck by the lack of oaks.
The lack of oaks. Yeah, we don't have that many oaks in our
Yeah.
site
Yeah.
specifically. And it's not actually by accident. It's likely they were.
It's the wrong side of the
taken
hill
out.
too.
Hmm?
Isn't it on the wrong side of the hill too?
But you know, like oaks were profitable and hemlock were not. Okay. So what I was interested in was whether we could tell whether the distribution that we found was an effect of the history of if it was a historical legacy of the management acts. And so he transferred the data analysis of the forest composition to a model where we looked at different sort of potential hypotheses that could contribute to spatial patterns. And I don't want to talk about the specifics, but basically we think about initial conditions could be something like this in the space that we have. And there could be some linear gradient to some abiotic condition like pH or elevation, something like that. And so one big question is, are the patterns that we're seeing a result of those abiotic conditions? Is it some environmental filter that's happening? Or is it a result of the social ecological feedback that's happening when you have some sort of historic management that disturbs the soil and sort of feeds back through biological processes to perhaps select for more tolerant plant communities? And the basic result is that we found that this sort of patchiness really only results when we have more of this positive feedback loop between the social ecological system. So it's kind of evidence suggesting that this is a more consistent hypothesis than the filtering one. And then, so that's kind of like the question, how does agriculture in the past affect what we have today? But I'm also really interested on the flip side, as an agriculturalist, I'm really interested in how do we transition our food systems to something that's more sustainable, something that will have less long-term consequences on our ecosystems. One of those types of food systems that we're really interested in for the region is agroforestry. Who's heard of agroforestry?
Forest trees, yeah.
Right. It's basically, I like to say very simply, it's trees on trees. There's very many specific definitions that I could give you, but I like this one because I think it gives a lot of room for people to interpret, you know, their specific management practices in the space. And I think it makes sense for the ecology of the system, right? This place is really good at regrowing its trees. We saw that in the historical map, right? And so in some cases, or in some sense, you can imagine that this landscape might also be really good at growing a food system surrounding trees in it. So a lot of people are actually really interested in agroforestry in the region. And one of the big pieces of our work is actually partnering with farmers in the region who are interested in different techniques like agroforestry. So this is just a photo of the barn at the Dartmouth Organic Farm this past summer, where we hosted a bunch of 4-H educators who were interested in developing curriculum around agroforestry at the farm. So we do this quite a lot, thanks to all the help that we have from Laura and people in sustainability to help us partner with community in bringing some of the research questions we have alive into practice. So part of this part of this is motivated by the question of how does the design of an agroforestry system impact how well like farmers can really establish these systems. So I don't know if I'm going over time, you should tell me. But I wanted to tell you really briefly about this experiment that I am really excited about. It's a food forest experiment. And as I mentioned, I'm also a modeler. I like to do things related to mathematical concepts. And so I'm really interested in the question, how can you design a food forest system where you have a complicated ecosystem combining layers? You have a canopy layer, you have a subcanopy layer, you have a shrub layer, and a ground cover layer. And people think that if you combine these things in the right way, where species traits are complementary to one another, you can reduce competition and really have a nice, more coexistent situation. The problem is that, yes, people have tried this out and they do see this happening, but it's very difficult to prove this is actually the case. The reason why is because it's so complicated, right? Like if you were to try to ask this question, you really need a lot of space and you need to devote a lot of that space to really kind of boring controls where you would have just like all of one of ground cover space, one plot that's all canopy, and you can imagine how much space and time that would take, right? So in this experiment, we wanted to basically set up a really small area where we could ask the question, what happens if we combine different canopies on each of the strata that are in there by specifically arranging the species that we have there to have a fractal arrangement. And this kind of allows us to see, for example, the canopy's effect on the canopy, the subcanopy's effect on the canopy, etc. Right? We can see each layered effect. And then we don't have to sort of sacrifice the space that we need to do because we kind of presume that the canopy is going to have this larger shade that affects all of the layers below it. And then each of the other levels are nested underneath. And so this gives us sort of like predictions of what like an effect would be if, say, the canopy was most important, the subcanopy, the shrub, the ground cover, or if it was a combination of all of these layers. And so in this experiment, what we do is for each strata, we combine two species with functional traits that are nitrogen fixers or non-fixers. And that's because many farmers are interested in nitrogen fixers as an alternative to synthetic fertilizers in food systems. And ecologically, they're really interesting because they kind of have different traits, right, that allow them to exist in more disturbed habitats than compared to plants that are non-fixers generally. And so we wanted to ask the question, how does the layering of nitrogen fixers influence, how well the ground cover establishes across the lot? So we have these predictions here that, if you have a darker red square here, it represents higher numbers of layers of nitrogen fixers. So it allows us to predict, okay, if layering is important, we'd expect sort of like this phenomenon. If species composition is more important, we expect this phenomenon. If a given trait
Can you
or
give an example of a nitrogen fixer and a non-nitrogen fixer? Is it all at the ground level?
It's at each level. So did I put them? I probably didn't put them. Maybe. Okay. So nitrogen fixer in the canopy tree is black locust. And the non-fixer is maple, sugar maple. Subcanopy, speckled alder is the nitrogen fixer, and then the tree, the non-fixer is apple. Then the shrub, we have what was it? Bayberry. So we tried to get local native species as much as possible, right? And so either like bayberry was used to make candles. It's like grows on the coast of Maine. So really interesting plant. And
So can I ask at this point, so root system doesn't come into play here at all?
good question. So I think, most paleontologists think that every amount of biomass you see above ground also translates to the biomass you see below ground. So there's going to be above ground effects and below ground effects happening at the same time. And we're assuming here that that footprint is the same, sort of like above and below ground. Of course, things change as things grow in. So you kind of expect the dynamics to shift over time. So that's the hope for this experiment, that we keep tracking it over time to see if competition shifts. So far, we've gotten some cool results for our first year of complete results. This is actually a picture of our food forest site. And you can actually see like different shades of green in the ground cover here. And this really tall stuff is our clovers. We had a mix of species for our ground cover. Nitrogen fixers were red and white clover and lupine. And then our non-fixers were strawberry, chives, and oregano. And so what we found is that as the percent of cover of nitrogen fixing plots increased, we got a decrease in the fraction of volunteer species. So basically the system is establishing better when we have more nitrogen fixing success. And then we also found this effect here with like the layers of nitrogen fixers. So as we go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of nitrogen fixers, we have an increase in the crop cover. But notably, this is dependent on land use history. We actually replicated the site at 2 parts of the O farm, one with a history of cultivation and one with the history of grazing pasture. And so this effect is really strong in the pasture side. And so what I think is happening here is that the cultivated site has higher background levels of disturbance. And so it kind of like washes out the effect of the nitrogen fixers.
So Teresa, is that result of the lift mainly due to just canopy cover? Just underground cover?
That's a good question, because this is just the first year data. So the level of shade is actually very minimal. Yeah. And we can talk more about this because I really think it has to do a lot with math and feedback. And yeah, but I'm not talking too much about that today. But I wanted to end here with kind of connecting agricultural past, present, and future. So our big goals in our lab are to ask, what are the legacies agriculture has left in our ecosystems? Do these legacies impact the future of agriculture? Do they kind of constrain where farmers can go? Because farmers are not just able to choose whatever piece of land they have, right? A lot of them have to work with land that they have. And then the question is, what can we do to manage and design new systems to mitigate the negative legacies of the past and increase resilience of future ones? So that's it for me.
The cattle fields also had a lot of manure on them as well.
Yes.
I mean, which is clearly nitrogen, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a good question, right? Because of course the cows are defecating in their fields, but in the cultivated field, they're adding nitrogen directly with fertilizers. And so different levels of impact for sure.
Do we know where animal die-off went to on this farm historically?
Where animal?
Yeah, where is that controlled for at all?
Where
Like when they died Where did they,
Where did
I
they
worked,
come?
I volunteered for many years on a farm and we composted a lot of animals.
I see.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so was there effort to compost or was it dig a hole, you stay there?
You know, if anyone knows the Bullington family, I would love to get connected with them and learn more about
Because
their.
I always kind of wondered what we were doing and it seemed like they took forever.
Yeah.
Because you just couldn't get enough soil variance and everything to break them down.
Certainly most farms have like a dump site. They probably did
Yeah.
have something like that. I don't know.
But I
specifically
get
at this time.
indigenously, there was yet another way of doing this.
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I know several members of the Fullington family. I'd be happy to.
I would love to talk to them.
Oh,
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to them too.
Great. I'm Carl Renshaw from Earth Sciences, Department of Earth Sciences, and I want to set expectations appropriately by giving you 3 warnings. One is I'm going to keep this very conceptual, right? So I think there's a data point in here, but maybe just one as we go here. Second, I want to warn you that they often talk about imposter syndrome in academia, the idea that you're up here talking and you think yourself really not qualified. I'm going to make the case, in fact, I am a total imposter to here. So keep that expectation with you. I'll make that case. And then finally, my ending is going to be entirely unsatisfying because we actually don't know the results yet, right? So I'm going to set up the problem, but I'm not going to be able to actually tell you whether it works or not. Okay, so with that as a start, Mark McPeak is also another professor here at Dartmouth, and of course Theresa as well. And so perhaps you've had the experience that I occasionally happen when someone will come up to you and said, "My son or daughter, they're applying to Dartmouth. Can you write a letter of support for them to get admitted?" To which I have to actually respond. In fact, faculty have no input on who gets admitted to Dartmouth. And in my experience, actually, when faculty try to insert themselves in the process, it usually works the other way, that they're far less likely to get admitted to Dartmouth. Okay, but that's only true at the undergraduate level. Right? At the graduate level, they actually apply to work directly with us, and so we actually control admissions there, and we get to see their application. And one of the questions on our application to apply to graduate school at Dartmouth is, why do you want to be here? Why do you want to come to an earth science department? And the truth is, students usually don't actually answer this the correct way, at least not the way we want them to answer it, which is probably more our fault for asking the question poorly. But it is sort of an interesting sampling of, like, if you ask a question, why do you want to come to earth sciences? You get this distribution of interesting responses. Far and away, I'm actually curious what you ever see this question too. The number one response I get goes something like this. I really want to study earth sciences because when I was young, my grandfather, grandmother took me out and made me plant in the garden. And I really developed this deep appreciation for nature and growing things. And I really want to, like, pursue this. Now, I'm going to put the little caveat there. I said I'm an imposter. I'm not really into the farming, food, none of this stuff, right? But still, right, this is the number one thing they write to me. And I was like, okay, well, that's great. But I took that to heart. I have 3 kids. They're now all post-college at this point, right? But I did this too, right? When they were young, I waited for a really nice warm day in the spring. Soil was all prepared. I took them out, and I made sure we had peas because they're nice and big for little hands. And we did this. We planted them and we covered them and we watered them. The bottom line is none of them actually now do anything related to earth or environmental science, right? So in some sense, it was a complete failure. And to be honest, I myself am pretty half-hearted. I get super excited when spring comes. I love spring, right? So things are growing, it's warm. It's like, great to be out there. Love planting. But you get to like the end of June, it's like, got to feel this too, right? It's like, I could weed and water the garden. I could go to the lake and sail. I could go mountain biking. And so honestly, my gardens are not super successful because it's all on me, right? I'm only half-hearted in this, right? And so I make this sort of long story to make the point that I actually don't come at this whole project working in the farm as someone has had a long passion for working with farms and food systems, right? In fact, it's truth be told, right? I would classify my primary interests as more along the lines of, hold on here, an ambulance chief. I'm actually a hydrologist. I have done a lot on flood hydrology. And let's be clear, floods are terrible things. People die. Infrastructure gets ruined. It just ruins life. They ruins life. Put that out there. But scientifically, for someone that's interested in water and floods, they are fascinating. Right? So I am in literally kind of this ambulance chaser in the sense of whenever we get these big storms, and they're more frequent for reasons we can talk about if you want to go talk about flood hydrology, which is really where my expertise lies. I'm interested in questions like, why did this bank get wiped out? And the banks there did not. So when we have floods, where does erosion occur? Where does it not occur? This has huge implications for how we sort of do hazard analysis. Okay, so I work in this flood area, and as I said, right, I'm scientifically really fascinated. I've been fascinated to the extent that people are fascinated by food and soils, right? Water, that's it for me. Ever since I've been young, right? I've been all forms of water, it doesn't matter. I'm just fascinated with water. I think it's the most amazing substance in the world. It's where my true interest lie. But working in this floods, as I said, right, floods are terrible things. Right? I still have nightmares about what happened this past summer in Texas, right? A tragedy that should never have happened, right? As someone that works in sort of flood mitigation, trying to prevent these things, totally preventable tragedy, right? And so I work in this field, and probably about a decade ago, maybe a little bit less, right? I came up and realized I'm really tired of working at the consequences of climate change, because the increased flooding is a consequence of climate change. So rather than always dealing with the consequences, could I do something about maybe trying to stop them in the beginning, or at least reduce the frequency of floods rather than these floods increasing? Right. So I got more and more interested in this. Is there some sort of knowledge I have that could be applied to trying to make this problem less severe? So rather than trying to put the Band-Aid on the problem, can we actually go and attack the problem? And so I give credit to Laura and to the rest of the organic farm, right, for letting someone like me come in and try to do, who's not really an expert in farming, and try to see whether I can make a difference. Right? And that's the goal. So what do I mean by that? All right. This is it's actually an artist's conception of what's called a direct air capture system. Every single solution out there for how we're going to deal with climate change involves at least some degree of taking the carbon that's already in the atmosphere and getting it out of the atmosphere. We know the number one solution is, of course, we need to reduce emissions, but we're also going to have to take some carbon out if we want to really control the long-term temperature increase. So people have built these machines, right? And these are called direct air capture, and literally what they do is you can see the big fans there. They're sucking air out of the atmosphere, and they're trying to trap the carbon there. They're going to sequester it in some form, and they're going to put it underground. Okay. If we look at these systems, they can take out, at full scale, something like 1 billion tons of CO2 per year. Sorry, 1 million tons. That should,
Billions.
yeah, it does say. Oh, that's because I gave away the trick. These things give out 1 million tons of CO2 per year. 1 million tons, that's a big number. You're saying no, right? And that's the whole point. It is a big number, but not in comparison to how much CO2 we're putting in the air. Right, where the scale is on, in terms of the emissions relative to air capture, right, we're talking about billions of tons rather than millions. In fact, the amount of carbon, CO2, these direct air capture installations can capture works out to be something like 0.0003% of how much we emit. So you start thinking about this and say, okay, so that implies I would have to have literally tens of thousands of these installations. And let's not even deal with the fact of how I'm going to power these things, right? Just like it is an entirely impractical solution. So in the world of flood resistance or flood mitigation, right? Every time we have a big storm, you always see the diggers get into the bulldozers and the backhoes, they go into the stream because there's this notion that we need to clean out the rivers. If we can clean out the rivers, they're not going to flood. From sort of a river health point of view, it's like the worst possible thing you can do. Right? So we affectionately refer to these populations as the boys and their toys, right? Because it's almost inevitably a boy and it has a big toy. I think about these as also boys and the toys, right? I don't know why we spent $1 trying to build any of this, right? Because it's not a practical solution. It's never going to work. Why are we even bothering? Super frustrating for me that this is how we're trying to think about it. All right, well, that's fine, right? What makes it even more frustrating is, why are we trying to solve this when, in fact, there's a system that draws CO2 out of the air, entirely free, incredibly more efficient than any machine out there? Right? Plants. They've evolved over time to be incredibly efficient at doing this really difficult process of sucking CO2 out of the air. Now, I know Mark is sitting there very kindly, right? And not saying, yeah, but, right? The but, of course, is, yeah, they're really good at sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere, but they're also friggin' breathing. So they're putting CO2 back into the atmosphere. And over time, right, that is more or less balanced. But here's the thing. Okay, those fluxes, and then how fast they're actually drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere and putting it back in, they're enormous. And so the idea is, if I could just tweak it a little bit and change that balance between how much is either being drawn out by how much photosynthesis I'm doing versus how much I'm being respired, I could dramatically change the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. We talk about this indirectly all the time when we think about planting trees as a way of solving the climate problem. What you're trying to do there is you're just trying to increase the rate at which temporarily we're drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere. Okay. Well, the other way to think about it is where that organic matter eventually comes, that CO2, it goes into the soil. Right? And this is where I'm getting more interested in the problem, right? It's like, if I can just slightly increase the amount of carbon that stays in the soil, okay, rather than being respired out in the atmosphere, then I can start changing the actual concentration in the atmosphere. And what do I mean by slightly? Well, there's an international program really centered at Earth over in Europe that says all I need to do is change the amount of carbon I'm keeping in the soil by less than 0.5%. Pretty small tweak. I'm no longer talking about 10,000 machines that I can't afford and I couldn't power even if I could build them. I'm just saying, if I can just tweak just ever so slightly the amount of carbon I can trap in that soil, because I have so much soil over the entire world, right, that is sufficient to actually offset anthropogenic emissions. That's the potential. This is what we should be talking about. In terms of a solution trying to draw out, right? We just need to keep, either we need to draw it down more efficiently, or we need to keep what's in, that we draw down in the soil, at least for a long time, that we can get over the climate transition. Okay? So that's what I'm trying to think about. Well, okay, fine. How am I going to do this? The idea here is, fundamentally, is like, rather than trying to come up with some technology or technological solution, right? Let's see if we can harness natural processes to do this. So let's think about natural controls on CO2 in the atmosphere related to soil. Okay, this is always a dangerous slide to show. Okay, because it's really easy to take the wrong message away from it. Okay, what I mean by that is this is CO2 over time, right? You can see where we are right now, about 425, 430 about parts per million, so over there. And we talk about, look, this is a big climate crisis. We have too much CO2 in the atmosphere. It's causing all this global warming. But if you take a step back and look over geologic time, right? So the last 400 million years, There have been all these all the times in the history of the Earth, when in fact, there's been a whole lot more CO2 in the atmosphere than there is now. And they kind of say, what's the problem? Why are we getting all upset about this? Look, okay, yeah, we're at 400, but we've been up at like 1600 in the past. Well, it's true. The difference is Homo as a genus, right, is about 3 million years old. Homo sapiens are about 300,000 years old. In other words, all of human history is right here, this little part, where in fact the CO2 concentration has been remarkably constant, meaning the climate has been remarkably constant, which probably helped us evolve, right? That we weren't having to deal with these wild swings in climate. Yeah, this is perfectly fine if you're a dinosaur. Literally, right? Because we're back here in the age of the dinosaurs, right? But for us to try to adjust to that kind of climate would be really difficult. And to adjust this quickly is really hard. So my point being, it's true. CO2 has been a lot higher in the past in the atmosphere, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are adapted to dealing with 1,600 parts per million CO2. It's still a problem. And in particular, the rate of change is particularly a problem, right? We just don't evolve fast enough. That's actually not the reason I want to show this slide. Because what's interesting to me is this. 50 million years ago, we were sitting at twice as much CO2 in the atmosphere as we have now, right? Starting 15 million years ago, dramatic decrease. So this is CO2 in the atmosphere. Humans aren't around yet. We're 50 million years ago, right? As I say, Homo as a genus is 3 million years old. Homo sapiens, only 300,000, right? So long before humans are around doing anything. And yet the Earth is drawing down CO2. If we can figure out how Earth's doing this now, can we do it now? I mean, how we did it 50 million years ago, can we do it now? That's the idea. So what happened there? All right. Got to orient yourself a little bit. We're 200 million years ago. Okay, age of the dinosaurs, absolutely. This is, some of you may have heard, this is Pangea. This is when all the land masses were together. Give you a little bit of orientation. This right here is the United States. This is the Appalachian Mountains, okay, at this time. Over here, this is South America. This is Africa right here over here. This is Europe and Asia sitting over here, okay? This is going to be an animation. So we're going to speed up. We're going to see if we're going to speed through time. I'll stop it briefly. Okay, so just to play it a little bit. So here we are. And just to give you a sense of where we are. This is the Atlantic Ocean opening up as North America separates from, at this time, it's a combination of Africa and South America sitting over here, the opening of the Atlantic. Okay, just to give you a sense of where we are. Asia is doing its own thing over here. Eventually, what you're going to see is Africa separate from South America as well. So this is all just setting the stage to here. Let me stop. I want you to pay attention to this landmass right here. This is India. Okay. We know today India is connected to Asia. Watch how that connection happens. Unbelievable how fast that is, right? And it's usually like time, right? India is just like going like gangbusters, right, to Asia. Incredible, right? Huge collision, right? That is the collision right now. Those are the Himalayas. That collision starts 50 billion years ago. Okay. One of the ideas here for what's going on, okay, is that when I start uplifting the Himalayas, I take a whole bunch of rock and I expose it to the atmosphere, it starts weathering. I actually get more rock weathering. And it turns out rock weathering is one way I can draw CO2 out of the atmosphere. Okay? So if I take CO2 and water, at this point, like Mark's on his phone, like, you know, a screenage over there, right?
He's looking at Matt.
I'm looking at
Data. He's looking at data.
I'm just having a good time.
I'm thinking about another variable.
I know, because that's how they roll. There are all kinds of other variables, right? You guys have all seen this. Maybe you haven't, I don't know. Any of you guys own one of these things? Just film a stream. I'm basically injecting CO2 into the water. Okay, and I'm creating carbonated water. Really what I'm doing is creating carbonic acid. Okay, so I took that water, which initially has a pH of 5.7. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And I've actually just I've made a whole bunch of carbonic acid. So now this pH is probably sitting down here about 3.5 or 3. Okay, with the amount of CO2 I've been put into it. Okay, I created this carbonic acid. That carbonic acid was created as I injected CO2 gas into the atmosphere. Well, we have CO2 in the atmosphere, we have water in the atmosphere, they combine, we actually have carbonic acid in our atmosphere. That's why our rain has a pH of nominally 5.6 or 5.7, whereas water, pure water, has a pH by definition of 7, right? It's neutral. Our water is slightly acidic. In fact, our rain is a little bit more acidic than that, thanks to atmospheric contamination with sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides. But it's actually getting better as we control that, right? Our pH around here is probably about 5.4 at this point. Used to be as low as high 3s, if you go back to 1960s. Another story. The key thing here, because we have CO2 in the atmosphere, it combines with the water in the atmosphere, produces carbonic acid. That acid goes and attacks the rock. And in the process, we create this bicarbonate ion. That bicarbonate ion then eventually ends up in the ocean where it gets sequestered, right? So what I've done, right, because of this process is I've taken CO2 in the atmosphere, had it react with the rock, and now created this bicarbonate ion where that's now trapped to the CO2. That carbon is no longer in the atmosphere. Okay, and this is basically what we think is happening with the Himalayas. So I uplift it, I get a whole lot more weathering going on. This reaction speeds up. I start dumping a whole bunch of bicarbonate into the ocean. That's drawing the CO2 out of the atmosphere. The point being, if I can speed up rock weathering, I can draw down CO2 out of the atmosphere. Well, that's a
Small task.
small task, but maybe not. Because this is what people are doing, right? They're taking rock, and quite literally, this is volcanic rock, it's basalt, and they're spreading it on, they're crushing it into really fine powder, and they're spreading it on agricultural fields. Okay? It's mostly silicon and oxygen, silicon oxide, which actually turns out to be a nutrient that plants need. Right, so this actually has benefits to the farmer of doing this because, in fact, we're slightly fertilizing their soil. So we're certainly not making it worse, and probably have a slight fertilizer benefit associated with it. But more importantly, by doing this, we grind it all up so it weathers really fast. So we're trying to actually speed up the rate of rock weathering. And the idea here is this is sort of a win-win proposition, right? Because the farmer gets not only soils that are fertilized, but also if we have a viable carbon credit market, they're getting carbon credits for doing this. And because the soils are more fertilized, their productivity goes up. So from a farmer point of view, right, we have the economic incentive to do this. Think about the boys and the toys. There's zero economic incentive. Even if we wanted to build those tens of thousands of direct air captures, there's no incentive to do it. Here, you've created both something that scales. We got farmland all over the place, right? And an incentive for farmers to do this. Because A, it helps them be more productive. And B, if we have a functioning carbon market, they get carbon credits for doing this.
And what's the source of the volcanic rock?
So it's all volcanic rock, and that's an important question, right? But it's relatively common, right? And so they just take where you have, and you can do it almost with any rock type to be.
You're not like talking transporting from.
You're right. This is part of the accounting, and I'm going to get to that,
Okay,
right? Because
sorry.
it's an important part of the accounting.
Okay.
You're totally right.
Keeping fossil fuels from living.
You got to crush it. You got to transport it. You know, if it's not local, this is probably not going to. It's going to really mess up the economics here. But in principle, it is a way we could actually draw down the CO2. So, does it work? The best answer I can tell you to that is maybe, possibly, definitely, who knows?
Sure.
Okay. So there are several companies out there that are trying to market this economic, or they're actually trying to create this system. And in fact, you can go and you can buy some crushed rock that they will apply in a field for you, right, as a way of getting a carbon credit, or you can just do it because you think it's good. So this is undo.com. This is a study which they claim shows that it works. So what you're looking at here is this is the top 5 centimeters of soil. This is the 10 centimeters down in the soil. Only 2 lines you really want to pay attention to. Red is where they applied a lot of that crushed up rock. And you're looking at cumulative CO2 removal over time. The red line's going up, they're removing CO2. Well, maybe. Because it's really important to point out this is potential CO2. Company markets is saying, this is great. Look, we're moving all the CO2. But if you actually look at the paper, the scientists who wrote the paper, who were funded by this company, by the way, so there's an entirely conflict of interest going on here that we're not even talking about, right? But to their credit, they are a lot more cautious. They say, well, yeah, this is potential, but if we're really emitting, we don't actually know how much CO2 was sequestered. Because all we really saw was if there were more ions in the soil after we applied the fertilizer. It could have been bicarbonate, could have been something else, some other charged species. And we don't really know where that bicarbonate came from because we can't trace it, we can't tie it directly to the rock we played on. And you say, yeah, the red line went up, but so did the blue where they didn't do anything. So is this increase real? You know, most of there's a sharp increase here, but after that, the red and blue kind of follow the same. So in fact, it's really equivocal whether this works or not. Show you another data set. This is from one that we're sort of related to, a project we're kind of related to, only indirectly. Same basic design. This is a field site over in Minnesota, where in fact they have a control case, and then they have where they apply this crushed basalt onto it. You're looking at alkalinity. It's basically how many ions you have, right? And again, it's the same argument. We can identify bicarbonate sitting over there, but we don't know where it came from. The argument is just more generally, if we see a greater number of ions in the soil, then we think that's evidence of weathering. But we can't really tie it directly to the weathering. The point that I really want to point out is, here's the control, here's the basalt. These guys aren't different. In fact, at this site, there's no evidence that adding crushed basalt did anything to the soil at all. This is probably, honestly, a better study here that says, it is certainly not the big home run everybody's hoping for, right? This was set up like, this is going to solve our problem. The data out there are, if it works, it's really marginal. But there's other box sitting over here, slag. This is actually what we're thinking. This is what we're looking at. Slag, right? This is a byproduct of iron smelting. Okay, so again, we have to think about transportation costs, but if you're close to an area where they do a lot of iron smelting, right? Slag is a byproduct of producing steel. It's a waste material. It's actually very similar to basaltic rock with one really important difference. Okay, it's got a lot of silicon, it got a lot of oxygen, just like the basaltic rock. It also, kind of expectedly enough, has high levels of iron. Even though they've taken a lot of iron, it still has a lot of iron. Iron is wonderful from an environmental point of view, right? So when your car starts rusting, you see all that that rust, right? It's all, it doesn't matter anymore because we don't have to get our car inspected, so you can have the car all you want. But still, it's kind of frustrating.
Stay tuned, that's cheap, maybe changing. We already did.
Maybe, yeah. Who knows what's going to happen? Right?
Council will let it.
It does seem like they may have to change it, but then they're not, you know, the fine is going to be $1 and they can't pull you over. I don't know. Anyways, different call. Here's the thing. I'm not actually so interested in that. Iron oxide, those little particles, rust, those are sponges for anything that's organic. In fact, in the world of groundwater remediation, which is actually where I started my academic career, looking at groundwater remediation, the most common way we clean up groundwater when we actually want to actively clean it up, it was you basically dump a whole bunch of iron filings into the ground and we let the water flow right through the iron. And it will suck out all those organic compounds like TCE, PCE, that are PFAS. Does not work so well in PFAS, unfortunately. That's a new world hard, but the traditional ones that we worry about, it's great at doing. You know, so you think about, you have your little Brita filter with that activated carbon, right? Which is good, but iron filings are better. Just more expensive, right? And so that's why that's why it's actually a problem. But it's the same idea. that's the thing, right? These iron oxides, they're just these sponges for anything organic, including anything that's in organics in the soil. So the idea here is, in addition to any potential benefits with rock weathering, by adding the iron, we're basically trying to trap the organic compounds in that soil in a form that they can't be eaten by the microbes. They can't be respired. They now become permanently trapped. Because the problem from a soil point of view, right, is that we dump a whole bunch of organics into that soil, which is great, but then the friggin' microbes eat the soil, which is good for them, but that releases all the CO2 in the atmosphere. I don't want to get rid of the microbes. Don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-microbe. I just want to put them on a diet. And I'm trying to put them on a diet by actually tying up some of their food stuff with little particles of iron oxides that makes it really hard for the bugs to eat that organic material. And so that's literally what we're doing at the organic farm here, right? So this is Molly Stevens. Another one of my failures to convert to the environmental world. She was a Dartmouth undergraduate, graduated last year, 2 years ago, went on to be an environment consultant, and has now decided that she wants to be a lawyer.
She can make a difference.
Could make a difference. I'm trying to keep her on like the environmental side, the environmental law side. Right. Anyway, she was a great student. What she's doing right here is she's actually spraying these iron slag onto their fields, right? Has this co-benefit because, in fact, iron is also a nutrient for plants, right? So the plants are getting both the silicate and the iron, which they like, right? And the hope is that by doing this, we're going to make some of the organic material in those soils less available to the microbes. So we're actually going to sequester the amount of some of the organic material, not let it be eaten by the microbes. Does it work? Well, I don't know yet. We've sampled again. Haven't actually processed the sample. Come back next year, we may have a better idea. Told you I was going to leave you a sort of unsatisfying conclusion, right? But I think the bigger story is that I think, what I would say is that if we want to try to get CO2 out of the atmosphere, the right way of thinking about it is, can we take advantage of these natural processes that are already doing it? I'm not a plant guy. You guys are plant guys, but plants are amazing at pulling CO2 out of that atmosphere. I think any solution to getting to reduce the amount of CO2 is going to involve plants in some form or another, right? Or in this case, we're actually trying to take what they've drawn out of the atmosphere and prevent it from going back into the atmosphere. If we can slow that process down, then I think we have hope. That's what I got. What do you have? We can open up for questions. We can,
If you want to fit in the 3 comfy chairs in front of the room.
I don't know if these guys want the chance to leave, because we talked probably longer than we had said. I don't know.
I want to hear that variable.
Oh, I want to hear your map. Well, they're
I
all
was just
here.
looking at the Kilauea data to see how much you go between summer and winter when you turn photosynthesis on and photosynthesis off. You've ever seen the CO2 map or the CO2 graph? Every year it wiggles.
It's less than 10. It's like 5.
Yeah, it's like 5 or 10, but it's a big enough wiggle.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the thing. Plants are great at doing this, right? I mean that's what we need to take advantage of, right? And they're very efficient at doing it.
Right.
So thermodynamically, it's really hard. When you think about, we say 400 parts per million. If you're trying to get that out of the air, you're trying to draw these molecules, these 400 molecules out of 1 million molecules. You're trying to draw them out. It's a really hard problem to do, right? And it's only because these plants have been able to evolve for so long that they figured out a way to do it very efficiently. But thermodynamically, it's a really hard problem to do.
There's another extraction of CO2, is it taking advantage of thermal settings, or it's not the fan kind? What is it they're doing?
Is this the ocean ones that we're thinking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So another way is they're trying to take advantage of, I phrase it as plankton poop, but it's really, basically it's the waste product of the phytoplankton that's sitting on the ocean, right? And so they're actually trying to, because that when they poop, right, that is carbon that's going down to the bottom. The problem is that it sinks so slowly that it basically dissolves and gets re-emitted to the atmosphere before it reaches the bottom. So what they want to do effectively is give a whole bunch of iron to the phytoplankton, and in doing that, they make their poop heavier, so it sinks faster, and then gets sequestered on the ocean floor rather than being emitted. Right? There are a bunch of people that are
Wasn't there a
working
guy
on
who
that.
was gonna do that himself?
What's that?
I seem to remember a couple of years ago, there was a guy who's talking about doing that himself,
There-
south of Alaska.
Yes.
And just, he was just gonna go out and do it and save the world, and everybody was like, wait a minute.
Exactly. Now you're really screwing around with the whole oceanic ecosystem. So there are a lot of people say, wait, before we do this, let's take a moment and figure out what are going to be the unintended consequences of seeding the ocean with a whole bunch of iron. And is it really what we want to do? Okay. So there are a bunch of research teams that are trying to pilot this and to show that it works. Don't know. Be great if it did. But I do worry about the unintended consequences.
So if you put the microbes on a diet.
Yep.
But the plants still can do their thing,
There's still plenty
grow.
of organic material in there, right?
then how are you gonna measure what's staying in the soil because of your treatment versus what the plants are still giving
So the-
back off
so the
because of
nice
their
thing
growth
about
and
our-
respiring?
The nice thing about ours is that we are trapping in this iron oxide. And so we can go directly to ask how much carbon is associated with that iron oxide. We don't have to do it indirectly, which is the rock weathering, where you have to worry about this bicarbonate. It's really hard.
Measured.
I can just directly figure out.
Right.
And keep in mind, right? It's 0.5% is what we're trying to do. The plants are not, and that's ideal. The plants are not going to feel that
Mhm.
Yeah, but
change
it's
of
a
0.5%.
0.5% if it's all the soil in the world. It's 50% if it's a small,
Yeah, no, it's a fair point, right? But it is something where you have the economic incentive, right? And I can't remember I always have to look this up. Do you know offhand how much of the world's land is forest? I mean, it's agriculture.
Around
Like,
50,
yeah, like
48.
a lot.
What, 48 is it?
Mhm.
It's like half, something like that. That seems right. So, yes, and admittedly, not all of that is industrial agriculture. So how we would do this, and we have it is, you would need to be close. So it's not the silver bullet. There is no silver bullets, but it could be part of the portfolio. And at least from my point of view, I really would stress it has an economic model behind it, whereas most of these other strategies don't. Even if you think about ocean seeding, who's going to pay other than this guy who decides he's going to solve it by himself? It's hard if you don't have the economic model behind it. It's really hard to believe that it's going to work, from my point of view.
So where do you get your iron oxide from?
It's actually coming from basically the Great Lakes area of Michigan. So there's a company that makes this, and we're working with them. So I get no money from them. All I get is the actual slag. So conflict of interest, just to be transparent, I do work with them, but I don't get any money.
There must be great reserves in Pittsburgh. WV.
Exactly. And you think about all the steel, it's going to be the steel areas. It's going to be the northern, which is actually going to work because our strong suspicion is that this technique is probably only going to work where the soils are already acidic. Because the chemistry of iron changes a lot when it starts becoming basic. Well, fortunately, that's where that's kind of the north. That's the glaciated regions where you get these acidic soils because they're young, and so they don't have one, right? And so there is kind of this nice correspondence between where the slag is and where we have the soils that this technique is probably going to work.
Is it too soon to know what the microbiology, the impact of?
It's a great question. I don't know, and
So is it still more theoretic, or is it cultured and established and measured at this point?
well, it's very well established that the microbes can't access this mineral associated carbon, right? That's pretty well in a sense. You could put it in with a bunch of microbes, and they just whatever reason it absorbs so strongly to the iron oxide that they'll go and find another source of organic rather than try to pull that carbon off the iron oxide because it binds tightly enough, it absorbs so tightly enough. Right? I think it's the same argument as the plants, right? It's still 0.5% of all the organic matter. There's so much other organic matter out there that they don't even see that missing amount. right? It's probably enough to reduce their population slightly, because that's all we're trying to do. So the density probably goes down. But no, to be perfectly honest, the reason I'm not a biologist is because it's too hard.
Well, I was about to say, I mean, if you just think about how humans move different metals, I mean, are there certain microbes that could utilize,
It's a great-
move the iron in one way, and others are like, I don't have a biosystem for that.
You're right. It's a great question, and we haven't seen it, but I don't think we've looked very hard. But I think
it's
the
very
argument
young,
is that yeah, it's pretty. I mean, the argument is there's so much other carbon around as a food source. The more limiting factor to them is going to be oxygen, in most cases, right? That's what's really going to control the kind of microbes you're seeing there, rather than iron. Iron is pretty rarely a limiting resource for them. So, but I don't know. It's a really fascinating question, and if this works, I think that's going to be, the same way we think about the ocean seeding, we have to really know what the ecosystem implications are. Let's see if it works on a small scale at the O farm, and then we can start asking a really fascinating question: how does it change the microbial community?
It's great.
Yeah, cool.
I had a question for Theresa. Just curious what other kinds of research you're hoping to do out there on the farm.
On the farm, we have a ton of different projects going on. One of my graduate students, she has an agroforestry nursery. And so one of her projects is working directly with farmers to understand sort of their interest in agroforestry and their barriers to entry in agroforestry. And so part of it was to create like a space that farmers could interact with agroforestry species. And so she's doing a really cool like social study to understand like how people of different groups and backgrounds interact with the nursery in different ways and how that might influence adoption rates. So that's like a more social example. And then we have another experiment where we are looking at forest gaps and how agroforestry species do in a gradient of light versus root competition. So it's kind of like repeating a study that was done at Yale in a forest regeneration context, but now in an agroforestry context. And then we're also just really interested in questions of pollinators and how do they respond to diversity of different crops and things. There's the Vermont Eco Studies that's doing a really cool project with species that are of different provenances, which basically means if you buy a plant at a nursery, often it comes from pretty far away, and it might have a phenological impact on how it interacts with pollinators. And so they're asking the question, does it matter, where these things are coming from? Because that's a huge limitation for projects like agroforestry too. It's there's actually very little nursery stock. And so that's also one of our interests is trying to show that small scale nurseries can develop locally adapted varieties to things and conserve some biodiversity that way. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
I'll go back to the historical aspect of the farm. And then they showed a picture of the Fullington family, which I think there's still some Fullingtons that live near there.
Yeah.
I can fill you in later.
Yeah.
I lived in what we used to call Greenhouse Farm. Do you know that dilapidated green
we were
building?
just talking about it.
In 82 to 83, we rented it from the college.
Yeah.
I see they're letting it go to whatever now. It's just being
I
falling
know.
apart.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's a whole
And
thing.
Fullington, and that was the Fullington farm, and the Fullington family, Holly and Lem, lived right next door, and Grandma, in those pictures, lived up on the other house there. And so I know the family that's still in the area. But and then the uncle had the part that's now Wilson Landing.
Oh, cool.
That was Wilson. That
Yeah.
was his place up there.
Wilson Fullington.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's his name.
Um,
So in relationship to the college, the farm has, in a way, come full circle. If you look at when Jay Barrett was the planning director here in the town, every year he used to make a calendar with photographs of interesting things around town. And there were downtown pictures of old businesses. One of them is Hanover's Farms. And he has photographs of all the old farms, Garapi Farm and others that are on each month of this. And there's a picture of the cows crossing the road, which they did twice a day.
The fields, you know.
The field that's on the side that you're researching
Yeah.
now was the pasture field.
Mhm.
And so they would bring them over to the barn for the milking and then take them back twice a day. So this picture shows the cows. I guess traffic had to stop, on Route 10 when this occurred. So, it was actually called Dartmouth Dairy.
Yes, yes.
And if you know where to go, cross the field from the farm down in that little gully and then go south, you'll find the farm dump.
Oh, I know.
You've been to the farm dump
Oh,
too.
yes, of course.
So have you sifted through and reached down
I haven't
and
done a lot of digging yet.
and grabbed up
I've seen the bottles, yes.
a handful of little tinfoil caps that went on the milk that say Dartmouth Dairy?
Yeah.
We should bring some.
I have some of those in my inventory.
Yes, yes. I teach agroecology and sustainable food systems. And one of my classes, I have a segment on historical legacies. And so we do a farm walk. I basically challenge them. I give them 4 tree tags in the 11,000 trees. And I make them find them.
Oh my gosh.
A specific tree, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Find number 732.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But along the way, they learn the history of the farm,
Mhm.
and so part of it is ending at the dump.
It's a pretty big
And-
dump. It's got some good stuff in it.
But
Yeah.
But I remember maybe now 10 years ago, on that side, Dartmouth College took a lot of trees out there. Is that?
Oh yeah. So that was part of our experiment to look at forest gaps. But the trees are being used for log cabins up at the second college grant.
Yeah.
And
But
so-
how does that disrupt your work? It's not the part you're studying.
Yeah, no, it's not, right, we're careful, well, actually, we have a whole new committee that's designed to look and make sure that we know what kind of research projects are happening, because there's so many different professors and scholars that are working on the farm, and so we're trying to keep track of that and manage it.
So there may be some very special trees there on the farm. About 15 years ago at the powwow, there's a gentleman there whose job is to evaluate basket ash trees.
Yeah.
And that's his job. He's a native, he's indigenous
There are
heritage.
some.
And at the powwow, on the green, they had an ash tree and they showed you how to pound it and how to cut the strips and, to recreate the techniques that indigenous people have used for thousands of years, maybe. He took us on a field trip to the farm. And if you go across from the farm, the organic farm, and go across the little soccer field and then down in, there's a gully there.
Yeah.
And it's a wet gully, and that's appropriate habitat for basket ash trees. And he took us through and walked around, and we observed what he said, and this is his job to go around the country, some of the largest ash trees that he had ever seen in diameter that are right there.
Are they being treated?
No, they're not being treated.
You're gonna lose them.
But I totally.
You know where I'm
I
talking
know
about?
exactly.
That spot?
I also agree that they're quite amazing.
Won't you lose them if you don't treat them? I mean,
Huh?
won't you lose them if you don't treat them?
You're speaking specific to the borer.
Yeah, which is all over the Upper Valley.
Yeah, it is not, so far, we've not found clear evidence of the ash borer on our site. Or the hemlock. will you indulge it? Those are other questions we have for the farm. So yeah, but it's likely to come eventually. And so that is one project we hope to eventually kick off. There's a lot of forest researchers and entomologists who are interested in that question.
It's already all over Norwich, so I can't believe you're not, if it's not there. You're very
Oh,
close.
it's around.
Yeah, it's here.
Yeah.
It's coming.
I'm just saying, is the process hands-off enough? You won't treat the trees, or will you treat them?
Well, the forest manager, we have one forest manager who's amazing, but we have over 30,000 acres of Dartmouth lands, forest lands. And so you can imagine that's a tough job to manage. But there's also, conflicting, yeah, like free, like there's just like different goals people have for the forest site. And so that's a question that we might have to think about. Just like, what
Well,
do we do?
particularly if these are amazing specimens, when you try to save them.
What?
If
Oh,
these are amazing
for
specimens.
these specific trees,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. That could be an important reason to do that. Mhm.
Yeah, culturally.
For sure.
So another historical perspective, if you go up on Balch Hill, there are ancient oak trees, like, this big around. And supposedly they follow a line from Balch Hill
Mhm.
to Fullington Farm.
Oh yeah, I love fence lines, old
And if
fence
you
lines.
go along there, there's actually,
Maples.
oh, I'm sorry.
Maples.
Sorry. Maple trees, yeah. If you follow the line, there's also an old Class 6 road that comes across there. And supposedly those, old antique maple trees followed that line up and over Balch Hill and down out to the Fullington Farm.
Yeah, I have an incompleted project about historical tree, like fence lines, in our plot because we know what the fence line trees are because they still have evidence of like wire and things like that. And there's also the structure of the tree. They tend to be like wolf trees because they have more access to light. And so yeah, we're really interested in that. Like, okay, like, can we tell if there's like a legacy of that tree line on the forest composition? Those are some questions we have about that.
Great. Cause or effect though, are you suggesting planting or the fences went up because they were utilizing, gee, there's a tree, let's attach our barbed wire to that and get the maple sugar? Or are you saying planting?
Oh,
Is
you
it
mean
so linear that they were planted? Or
Or left.
They
We're
left
still
them
looking
stand.
for-
Let them
let
stand.
them stand
When
it,
others-
cut and left the line?
yeah, usually
Like if you go out to Escobar, people know Escobar, on the road out there, there's a maple after maple after maple right along that road, you know.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you.